The U.S. did not get involved in World War II in 1938 to 1940, but instead stayed neutral. This decision was mostly due to the country's wanting to be an isolationist country after what happened in World War I. When the war broke out on September 1939, after the German invasion of Poland, Franklin D. Roosevelt declared that the United States would stay neutral, while he also made an effort to aid the Allies, who included Great Britain and France, in Europe, who were fighting the Axis powers. These Axis powers included Germany, Italy, and eventually Japan. Japan's emperor at the time was Hirohito, and its military leader was Tojo. Japan's main conflict was with China, a longtime friend of the U.S. Tensions began to grow when the Japanese army bombed the USS Panay as it evacuated American citizens from Nanjing, the Chinese capital. But an apology and indemnity from the Japanese was accepted to continue to avoid conflict. A truce between the U.S. and Japan held between the nations into 1940. In 1940, the U.S. formally began to aid China to help them against Japan, while also slowly restricting Japan of war supplies. These supplies included oil, steel, iron, and other commodities needed by the Japanese. Japan relied on the U.S. for almost all of their oil, which was necessary if Japan wanted to keep pushing to Asia. In January 1940, Japan broke off the Treaty of Commerce it had with the United States, opening the Roosevelt administration to embargoes on Japan to stop their aggression into China. The United States then increased aid to China using larger credits and Lend-Lease programs. Then in August, Japanese political leaders established the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, with the intention to drive the Western nations from Asia. Japan then furthered the United States' concern when they signed the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy on September 27, 1940, which linked the conflicts in Europe and Asia. Following this pact in mid-1941, Japan signed a neutrality pact with the Soviet Union, making it known they were pushing into Southeast Asia, where the U.S. had greater interests, which included French, British, and Netherlands territory. This advance caused the U.S. to halt all negotiations with Japanese leaders and instituted a full embargo on Japan, which after a while led way to reinstating negotiations which didn't budge whatsoever. Japan then decided to act swiftly as they saw no chance of negotiating with the U.S., and on December 7, 1941, they made their first move.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
On December 7, 1941, Japanese forces under the command of Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagamu launched from Japanese aircraft carriers in the Pacific Ocean. A force of 360 aircraft plus several submarines attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii at 7:55 a.m. After about 2 hours, the attack was over. The U.S. had lost 18 ships, 170 aircraft, and suffered about 3,700 casualties. On the next day, December 8, 1941, the U.S. and Britain both declared war on Japan. The U.S. Navy quickly moved into the Pacific Ocean, and many naval battles took place between Japan and the U.S. On December 15, 1941, the first Japanese vessel was sunk by the U.S. This angered Japan, and they began to invade many countries and places in the Pacific, including British Borneo, Hong Kong, Luzon in the Philippines, Burma, and Guam. On December 23, 1941, General Douglas MacArthur had to make a difficult decision. He either had to keep his headquarters located in Manila, which would put thousands of troops at risk, or move his headquarters to Bataan, which would declare Manila an open city. This would allow the Japanese to come in and take it over. He decided to move his headquarters to Bataan, which saved 75,000 of his own troops, and Manila was declared an open city on December 26, 1941. The following day, on December 27, 1941, instead of taking over Manila, like MacArthur had expected, the Japanese bombed Manila instead. Following the bombing, naval and land battles continued between the U.S. and Japan in the Pacific in the following years. On February 1, 1942, the first U.S. aircraft carrier offensive of the war conducted air raids on Japanese bases in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. On March 18, 1942, the U.S. began to round up Japanese Americans in the U.S. and sent them to barbed wire relocation centers as a safety precaution during the war. On April 3, 1942, the Japanese attacked the U.S. forces in Bataan. The fighting was brutal, and on April 9th, the U.S. forces surrendered to the Japanese. On April 10th, 1942, the Japanese forced the Allied prisoners of war to march 60 miles without food or water to the new prisoner of war camp. This resulted in 5,000 American deaths and became known as the Bataan Death March. On June 4th and 5th, a huge battle took place at Midway. This was an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that the Japanese and the U.S. fought over for many days. Squadrons of U.S. torpedo planes destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers and damaged several others. This U.S. victory was a major win and a huge turning point during the war. On October 11th and 12th, 1942, U.S. destroyers and cruisers defeated a Japanese task force at the Battle of Cape Esperance off Guadalcanal. On November 14th and 15th, 1942, U.S. and Japanese warships fought again off Guadalcanal. This resulted in the sinking of a U.S. cruiser and the deaths of the 5 Sullivan brothers. On December 2nd, 1942, the Battle of Tuscarora took place off Guadalcanal. On December 31st, 1942, Emperor Hirohito of Japan finally gave his troops permission to withdraw from the Guadalcanal after 5 horrible months of fighting the U.S. and many casualties. Following the withdrawal of Japanese troops, the United States took back most of the land the Japanese Empire had taken at the beginning of the battles.